Welcome to another Human Read audiobook by the United Marxist Pact Discord server, linked below in the description. In this series, we continue our investigation into the initial construction, the organizational structure, and the principles and tactics of the form of worker organization capable of seizing political power and establishing the revolutionary proletarian dictatorship and communality, which can in turn produce the communist mode of production through the shared class interests of the workers of the entire world. Our goal is to compile, analyze, and elaborate on what all of these texts have to say about this, and at the end have a strong understanding of the exact scientific process of this, particularly in general terms. At the end of our readings as a whole, we will try to put it all together and present it as a coherent whole in an educational video with associated notations. Today's reading will be part 2 of the questions of organization. This is the Reunion of Naples thesis on the historical duty, action, and structure of the World Communist Party according to the positions that for more than half a century form the historical heritage of the communist left. That's an anime title if I ever heard one. Anyway, we will have a pre-written textual analysis on the terms of the aforementioned topics, which is also posted in the pinned comment if you prefer to read in text, or follow the link in the description to a read-only version of my Google Docs notes. This will summarize the contents of the text, but is no replacement for the actual reading itself for the sake of understanding the context and full content of the piece. In addition, in the reading I supply my own commentary, critiques, additions, etc., which may be helpful for understanding some particularities. I do not write down things that are repetitious or I feel are completely inapplicable. Okay, let's get right into it. It bears repeating that the program, tactics, and organizational structure are all dependent on one another and are therefore invariant and dialectically related to one another. There are aspects of organization which have been shown to be historically determined, and from that we can determine what organizational structures and tactics are impermissible as they are in contradiction with the tactics and organizational structure that can achieve our aims. Examples of these include 1. Centralization, discipline to the center, refusal of autonomy from the international or any sort of federal structure. This requires refusal of the United Front, which marries the party to non-proletarian organizations and harms its autonomy. Attempts to bring whole parties into the party through fusions rather than vetting individuals. Admittance of sympathizers to the Comintern based on political reasons rather than based on their program and how they carry that program out. Use of ideological terror by the center to enforce discipline, rather than having proper principles of centralization. Rather, the center should not have unquestioning obedience from party members in order to have false discipline, but rather the membership itself needs to be able to direct the center while remaining disciplined. The party should never have forced membership or any coercive pressures in discipline, such as the power of an executive power to make changes according to the whims of some section of the party over another. There are no, quote, revelations of theoretical conceptions as if descended from God to an elected individual. And individuals cannot develop theory while under the thrall of bourgeois society, and the correct stance will degrade in the hands of a lonesome individual. It requires a party that is prefigurative of communist society and in constant activity and discourse with it in a centralized, organic manner. 2. Refusal of workerism or laborism. Therefore, while the party should go wherever the workers are, it should not be divided up with different activities, theoretical and material action, and all local groups should be active in all fields. All members should be involved in theory, study, historical research, propaganda, proselytism, and trade union activity. 3. The aim, that is the dictatorship of the proletariat, which is capable of surviving the counter-revolution and carrying out communist development. Thus, the slogan of, quote, a workers' government, as opposed to the dictatorship of the proletariat, which allowed inclusion of other classes and the ignorance for the need of violence, must be rejected at all times. 4. Strict adherence to revolutionary defeatism. 5. Rejection of bourgeois society entire through the prefiguration of the party. This means that engagement in electoralism both with the bourgeois parliaments and within the party must be resisted, with the recognition that the bourgeoisie will cease paying lip service to democracy the moment the proletariat take action to carry out the real program. Therefore, democracy should not be engaged in externally. Any party which wishes to actually construct communism needs to carry out the real program. Therefore, we cannot at any point rely on democracy, and within the party, the term democracy should be supplanted by a new form of decision-making apparatus, and any elections within the party for named comrades or general theses to be universally applied should not occur. The historical party, which is non-existent, fluid thing that emerges at historically correct conditions and formalizes, is capable of reversal praxis in order to look to the future. The formalized party, which comes out of this historical party, eventually necessarily becomes conservative because it exists in reality and is unable to be as dynamic as the ideal party. This historical party prefigures communist society in the future, taking on the form of that communist society, but it is also situated in the present and doesn't allow counter-revolution within the party. And I just want to say that this historical party is fundamentally not a thing that ever exists, and there's a lot of what eventually will emerge, if it isn't already here, fetishism of the party and the conception of the party as the only way to develop, and it essentially takes the human out of it in a certain sense. The all action that the individual does is alienated from them into the party, and the party itself takes on a mystical form, and they actually lean into this in a later thing that we'll eventually get to in quite some time. But anyway, so the party as a working organization must recognize on a basic level that its work will be important, difficult, and take a significant period of time. Such recognition should expel careerist elements, as any sort of victory is unimaginable, and frequent meetings engaging competing theses, publications through press communications should occur without debate, polemics, votes, or deliberation, aiming principally at theoretical elaborations, which will produce quantitative and qualitative growth in ranks along with spontaneous discipline and adhesion within the party. This is just describing an academic setting, which does not produce any of these, and also definitely produces debate and deliberation. If no decisions about future activity are being made, then the meeting is fundamentally unproductive, which also harms morale. The party is both a factor and a result of historical conditions and is never external to or able to dominate the surrounding environment. To believe otherwise is to fall into utopianism, with the belief that the prefigurative party can simply establish communist society within a larger capitalist one. Okay. And now I will begin the full audiobook reading. This will explain the full text as being summarized here and in such a way that you will be able to understand what and why was extracted from it. I hope that you enjoy the full reading, and reminder that there's some stuff that's very stupid in some of these. Things really kind of start going off the rails around this point, but really around Kamat, honestly. Anyway, the International Communist Party's theses on the historical duty, action, and structure of the World Communist Party, according to the positions that for more than half a century formed the historical heritage of the communist left. This is from the Theses of Naples from July 1965. 1. The question that were historically enunciated as referred to in the party's ideology and doctrine to its action in the various historical situations, and therefore to its program, its tactics, and its organizational structure, are to be regarded as a single body. Thus, in the course of the left struggle, they have several times been set to order and enunciated without ever introducing changes. The party's press will be committed to the reproduction of texts. For now, it is sufficient to recall some of them, cornerstones of our doctrine. And we have read all of these. It's the complete theses of the abstentionist communist fraction of the Italian Socialist Party of 1919. Rome Theses of the Second Congress of the Communist Party of Italy, March 1922. The positions taken by communist left in the International Congress of 1922 and 24 in the Enlarged Executive of 1926. Theses of the Left at the Legal Conference of the Communist Party of Italy, May 1924, and Theses introduced by the Left at the Third Congress of the Communist Party of Italy, Lyon, 1926. So we're going to actually add this right here. And what's pertinent about this is, so the program, tactics, and organizational structure are all dependent on one another and invariant. 2. In the above and many other texts that will be utilized and which will be included in a perfect continuity of positions in the volumes of the, quote, history of the communist left, end quote, are constantly vindicated and reaffirmed certain former results, considered as heritage of revolutionary Marxism. It is there also that classical and programmatic texts, such as the Manifesto of the Communist Party and Statutes of the First International of 1864, are set store. I think they mean set in stone. The programmatic cornerstones of the First and Second Congresses of the Third International, founded in 1919, are likewise vindicated, as well as the fundamental and preceding theses of Lenin on the imperialist war and on the Russian Revolution. At the same time, the left, having taken a clear stand, has as part of its heritage the historical and programmatic solutions that are stemmed from the denouement. Okay, hold on. Google. I read the tournament actually first, which is why I kept reading that out loud. And I was like, wait, no, that doesn't sound right. And I read it again. Uh, Google Translate. The outcome. Thank you. And that's French. At the same time, the left, having taken a clear stand, has as part of its heritage the historical and programmatic solutions that stem from the outcome of great crises faced by the proletarian movement. In them, the theory of counter-revolutions and the doctrine of the struggle against the ever-reviving opportunist danger is summarized. I'm confused why they translated everything else, but then they used the word outcome in French. Both in the original Italian and in the translated text to English. It's pretty silly. But regardless. Among these historical cornerstones bound both to the sound theoretical outlook and to the great battles of the masses are, for example, A. The ridding, wanted by Marx, of petty bourgeois and anarchist currents, which endangered the basic principles of centralization and discipline to the center of the organization, and the condemnation of the harmful concepts of autonomy of local section of federalism among the sections of the World Party. In such deviations lies the cause of the shameful ruin of the Second International, founded in 1889 and shattered in the 1914 war. B. The judgment of the glorious experience of the Paris Commune given in the texts that Marx wrote on the International's behalf, which confirmed the parliamentarist methods being obsolete and applauded the insurrectional and terrorist vigor of the Great Paris movement. So we read these in our research on what Marx had to say about the dictatorship of the proletariat. This would include the Civil War in France, and other things of that nature. Where we have it, and Engels and Marx both considered the Paris Commune as representative of what they have in mind for the dictatorship of the proletariat. So the class struggle in France, civil war in France. Yeah. Okay. B. The condemnation from the true revolutionary Marxist left on the verge of the First Great War, not only of revisionist and evolutionist reformism, risen in the whole international with the aim of dismantling the vision of a revolutionary catastrophe, peculiar to Marxism, but also of the reaction to it. apparently proletarian in the quote unquote workerist sense, and in perfect agreement with the far right laborism. That was a revolutionary syndicalism of Sorel and the others. Essentially, the idea that, hey, because workers are in charge, that automatically makes a proletarian. Such a current, on the pretext of getting back to the violence of direct action, condemned the fundamental Marxist position on the need for a revolutionary, centralized party and of a dictatorial and terrorist proletarian state, which are instead the sole instruments able to lead the class insurrection to victory, and to strangle any attempt at revenge or corruption by the bourgeois counterattack, thus laying the foundations of the classless and stateless communist society, which will crown the victory on an international scale. D. The criticism and relentless demolition made by Lenin and by the left of all countries of the ignoble betrayal of 1914, in other words, about revolutionary defeatism and nationalism and all that. The most lethal and ruinous form of such betrayal not being so much a shift under the patriotic national flags as a return to deviations contemporary with the birth of Marxist communism itself, according to which both program and action of the working class are to be framed within the limits of the bourgeois canons of freedom and parliamentary democracy, boasted as eternal conquests of the early bourgeoisie. So this would be quote unquote evolutionary communism. Um, so let's see. I'm gonna take this. All right, so the need for the party organization, which has centralization, discipline to the center, no local autonomy from the international, federals, etc., no workers or laborers' conception, the recognition of the need of the dictatorship of the proletariat that is capable of surviving counter-revolution and carrying out communist development, revolutionary defeatism, and rejection of bourgeois society entire. Continuing. 3. As regards the subsequent period in the life of the new international, that the enduring heritage of the communist left is a correct theoretical diagnosis and historical prediction of the new opportunist dangers that emerge over the course of the first years of the international. Avoiding heavy intellectual theorizing, this point needs to be developed using the historical method. The first manifestations denounced and opposed by the left occurred in the tactics regarding the relations to be established with the old socialist parties of the Second International, from which the communists had become organizationally separated as a result of splits, and consequently also in erroneous measures in the realm of organizational structure. The Third Congress had correctly established that it wasn't enough. Already in 1921, one could see that the great revolutionary wave that came after the war in 1918 was petering out, and that capitalism would attempt a counteroffensive on both the economic and political fronts. To have formed Communist Party strictly committed to the program of violent action, to the proletarian dictatorship, and to the communist state. Huh? If a large part of the proletarian masses remained under the influence of opportunist parties, which all communists now considered the worst instrument of bourgeois counter-revolution, and whose hands are covered in the blood of Karl Liebknecht and Rosa Luxemburg. At the same time, the communist left did not accept the formula that made revolutionary action conditional, to be denounced as a Blankist initiative of small parties. Reminder, the Blankists were essentially, they believed that revolution could be carried out by a small group of secretive people conspiring in the shadows and doing stuff like assassinating people and then taking their positions and tearing down the bourgeois society from the inside. And at the moment of the revolution, they would then, go in and through conspiracy and whatnot conquer the masses through through basically saying, look at what a gift that we have brought you, right? So yeah, Marx and Engels talked about both of them. On the conquest of the quote majority end quote of the proletariat, besides which one never knew this meant the majority of the actual wage proletariat, or the people, including property peasants and micro-capitalists, artisans, and all other paid bourgeois layers. With its democratic allure, this formula of the majority triggered the first alarm bells, unfortunately confirmed by history. Now, opportunism could be reborn into new international under the familiar banner of homage to the deadly concepts of democracy and electoral counts. From the Fourth Congress, which took place at the end of 1922, the left stood by its pessimistic prediction and its vigorous struggle to denounce the dangerous tactics, unite front between communist and socialist parties, the slogan of workers' government, and organizational errors. Attempts to increase the size of the party is not simply through an influx of those proletarians who had abandoned the other parties with the Social Democratic program of action structure, but by means of fusions that accepted entire parties and portions of parties after negotiations with their leadership, and also by admitting to the Comintern as national sections parties claiming to be quote unquote sympathizers, which is clearly an error in its drift towards federalism. Taking the initiative on a third issue, it was from this time that the left announced, ever more vigorously in the years that followed, the growth of the opportunist danger. This third issue was the International's method of internal working, whereby the center, represented by a Moscow executive, resorted not only to the use of ideological terror in its dealings with the parties, or even parts of them that had made political errors, above all to organizational pressure, which amounted to erroneous application and eventual total falsification of the correct principles of centralization and absolute discipline with no exceptions. We'll take this, but I want to see if this next bit should be added as well. This method of working was tightened up in all countries, but especially in Italy after 1923, when the left, with the whole party behind it, displayed exemplary discipline by handing over the leadership to the comrades of the right and center appointed by Moscow, where the specter of fractionalism was being seriously abused. This would be in reference to the breakdown between Trotsky, the right faction, the left opposition, and so on and so forth, along with the constant threats to expel a current artificially accused of preparing a split from the party, with the sole aim of allowing dangerous centrist errors to prevail in the party's politics. This third vital point was discussed in depth at the international congresses and Italy, and is no less important than the condemnation of the opportunist tactics and the federalist type organizational formulas. In Italy, for instance, the centrist leadership, while accusing the left leadership of 1921 and 22 dictatorship over the party, which instead several times demonstrated to be in total agreement with the left, kept using the specter of Moscow's orders, even daring to exploit the formula of International Communist Party, as was done in 1925 during the pre-Lion polemics by Palmiro Togliatti, real champion of the Communist International's liquidationism. Okay. We're going to just get this section here, because the other thing is not, that's simply an example, potentially useful, but not for our purposes. All right, so tactics which harm the above, this stuff right here, include the United Front, which married the party to non-proletarian organizations and harmed its autonomy, the slogan of workers' government as opposed to dictatorship of the proletariat, which allowed inclusion of other classes and the ignorance of the need for violence, attempts to bring whole parties into the party through fusions rather than vetting individuals, admittance of sympathizers to the Comintern based on political reasons care rather than based on their program and how they carry that program out, use of ideological terror by the center to enforce discipline rather than proper principles of centralization. And I think that pretty much all of us can agree that this, as an example, like imagine on our server, if we essentially did this with, for example, the communist library. No questions asked. If you're part of the communist library, you get an invite into it, and we don't vet you through. Yeah, not gonna work too well. Anyway, 4. It is worth showing how the demonstration of the correctness of such criticisms and diagnoses is to be found in historical events. Although it is easy to object to the left, which announced the warning signs of a mortal crisis that was merely based on doctrinal worries. As for the tactical question, it is enough to recall that the United Front was born as a method to ruin the socialist parties and to leave their leaders and headquarters deprived of the masses which supported them, while such masses were supposed to come over to us. The evolution of such tactics demonstrated that it can take the danger of leading to a betrayal and to an abandonment of the classist and revolutionary basis of our program. The historical sons of the United Front of 1922 are today well known. The Popular Front, created in order to support the Second War of Democratic Capitalism. The Anti-Fascist Liberation Front, which led to the most open class collaboration, extended to declaredly bourgeois parties. And the above is summarized the monstrous birth of the last opportunist wave, upon the collapse of the Third International. The first organizational maneuvers of the 1922 fusions laid the bases of the total confusion existing in the present parliamentary and democratic policy of all parties, including the Communist Party, which thus tore to pieces Lenin's theses on Parliament of the Second Congress. Since the Russian Party's 20th Congress of 1956, while getting rid of the world organizational unity in order to admit the very socialist, worker, and even popular parties of this or that country, what the left foresaw was done. That is, the abandonment of the program of proletarian dictatorship reduced to a peculiarly Russian phenomena, and the introduction of democratic and national ways to socialism, which only indicate a relapse into the same infamous opportunism of 1914, or rather, as it is operated in the name of Lenin, into a much more base and infamous one. You know, the Chinese socialist road, or whatever it is that they call themselves doing right now. Ridiculousness. Continuing. Finally, the accusation of the method of work in the international and the wrongful pressures from above, while seeing in 1926 a misleading offer made by centrists of, quote, a bit more democracy within both party and international, end quote, which was rightly rejected by the left, which remained in its opposition positions, though without threatening until then, 1926, to lead the international or to split parties. It is historically confirmed by the ferocious Stalinist terror, employed in order to devastate the party from the inside by means of state forces, that is, in order to crush, through tens of thousands of murders, a resistance which was led in the name of a return to revolutionary Marxism and to the great Leninist and Bolshevik traditions of the October Revolution. All those positions outlined a previous prevision of the future course of events, although unfortunately the force relations were such as to allow the third infamous opportunist wave to overwhelm everything. The left indicated in time the right terms of the relations between parties and international, between the Russian party and the state. The reversal of such positions is to be historically related to the issue of relations between Russian state policy and proletarian policy in all other countries. When under Stalin, who in the enlarged executive of autumn 1926 laid all his cards on the table, it was declared that the Russian state would give up the idea of making its future conditioned on a general class engagement, able to overthrow the power of capital in all other countries. And then, when it was stated that the watchword in internal social policy was that of construction of socialism, which in Lenin's language only meant the construction of capitalism, then the further course was a foregone conclusion, and it was confirmed by the bloody conflict through which the opposition, too late arisen in Russia and crushed just in time under the loathsome accusation of fractionist work, was exterminated. And reminder, we had read that Trotsky piece, the new whatever it was, the new course about the handling of fractions, among other things. And this is actually a very good piece, and I think it's very important to understand what was going on there with the treatment of the opposition. and essentially the way that the various fractions and oppositions, as a result of the internal contradictions and distinctions within the party, many of which were completely able to be dealt with through analysis and through proper working, under the guise of ending the factionalism, you know, these bad actors came to position um, and silence all dissent under the name of ending all factionalism. And it only pushed it to the side and allowed for the part and removed the ability of the party to deal with its internal errors. Anyway, continuing. The above is to be relayed to the delicate question that, once a suffocating apparatus was imposed in the name of a falsified centralism on all parties which had in their ranks fervent revolutionaries, it was relied not so much on the influence of huge names like Bolshevism, Lenin, October, as on the common economic fact that Moscow's state had the means by which the officials of the apparatus were paid. The left saw all these shames in a remarkable silence, because it knew what other tremendous danger would have been to pay bourgeois and anarchist deviation with its chatterings. You may see that the end was always the same. Where there is a state, where there is power, where there is a party, there's corruption. If the proletariat wants to free itself, it has to be done with no parties and no authoritarian state. We knew that too well, though Sound's line meant since 1926 the delivery of our victory to the bourgeois enemy. Such aberrations of middle class would be intellectuals are always, we can now refer to experience more than a century old, the best guarantee for the survival of hateful capitalism by snatching from the hands of its executioners the only weapon able to kill it. So basically, they're saying, the people who are just saying that, oh, having access to power is a problem. Um, they're just ultimately ridding you of your ability to do anything about it. In reality, it wasn't a problem of power. It wasn't a problem of authority or the party or anything like that. It wasn't a problem of corruption. Um, those things, or at least those things are problems, or at least the latter parts are. It's just that it needs to be focused towards the bourgeoisie rather than, yeah. Anyway, sorry, I'm tired. Along with the awkward influence of money, which will disappear in communist society, but only after a long chain of events, which the achievement of the communist dictatorship is but the first step, was added to the well wielding of an instrument of maneuver, which we openly declare to be worthy of parliament and bourgeois diplomacy, or of an extremely bourgeois league of nations, that is, the encouragement or inculcation, according to the circumstances, of careerism and vain ambition amongst the swarming ranks of paid government officials, so that each of them would be faced in an inexorable choice between immediate and comfortable notoriety after prostrate acceptance of the theses of the omnipotent central leadership, or else permanent obscurity and possible poverty if he wished to defend the correct revolutionary theses, which the central leadership had deviated from. Today, given the historical evidence, it is beyond dispute that those of the international and national central leaderships really were on the path of deviation and betrayal. According to the left's unchanging theory, this is a condition that must deprive them of any right to obtain in the name of hypocritical discipline and unquestioning obedience from party members. Okay, so let's see. I think that this is saying, so the center should not have unquestioning obedience from party members in order to have false discipline. The membership needs to be able to direct the center, but still be disciplined. Um, and we'll see if that talks about organic centralism at some point, which is what I assume it will be going towards. Anyway, 5. The work carried on to reconstitute everywhere the class party after the end of the Second World War found an extremely unfavorable situation with the international and social events of such a tremendous historical period in every possible way favoring the opportunist plan of wiping out the policy of conflict among classes. It's emphasizing before the blinded proletarians the need of supporting the restoration of the whole world of democratic parliamentary constitutionalisms. In such a terrible position, worsened by the diving of big proletarian masses into the stinking practice of electionism, which was apologized by false revolutionaries in a much more shameless way than Second International Revisionists, our movement, though compelled to go against the stream, appealed to its whole heritage coming from the long and unfavorable historical event, having adopted the old watchword, quote, on the thread of time, end quote. Our movement devoted itself to setting before the eyes and minds of the proletariat the meaning of the historical results inscribed along the route of a long and painful retreat. It was not a matter of restricting our role to cultural diffusion or propagandizing of paid doctrines, but in demonstrating that theory and action are dialectically inseparable fields, and that teachings are not book learned or academic, but are derived from, not experiences exactly. A word we wish to avoid is now fallen prey to philistines. Probably talking about like the situationists or something. I don't know. But from the dynamic results of confrontations between real forces of considerable size and range, with use made also in those cases in which the final result was a defeat of the revolutionary forces. The latter is what we refer to, using the old Marxist criteria as, quote, the lessons of the counter-revolutions. So basically they're saying that they did propaganda and said, hey, the USSR's opportunist and revisionist, and remember history. And that's all that they felt that they could do. Okay, continuing. Other difficulties for the setting of our movement on its own bases arose from overly optimistic prospects, according to which having the end of the First World War bring a great revolutionary wave and the condemnation of the opportunist pest, thanks to the action of the Bolsheviks, of Lenin, and of the Russian victory, the end of the Second War in 1945 would give rise to parallel historical phenomena and make easy the constituting of a revolutionary party in conformity to the great traditions. Such a prospect might be judged generous, but was greatly wrong because it did not take into account the hunger for democracy, quote unquote, that had been instilled among proletarians, not so much by the more or less truculent exploits of Italian and German fascisms, as by the ruinous relapse into the false hope that with the recovery of democracy, everything would in natural way come back to on the revolutionary lines. While the central position of the left is the consciousness that the biggest danger lies in the populist and social democratic illusions, which are not the basis for the new revolution, supposed to make the Kerensky-Lenin step of opportunism the most powerful counter-revolutionary force. For the left, opportunism is not a phenomena of moral nature caused by the corruption of individuals. It is instead a phenomena of a social and historical nature, owing to which the proletarian vanguard, in place of drawing up in the array that opposes the reactionary front, sorry about that. Owing to which the proletarian vanguard, in place of drawing up in the array that opposes the reactionary front of the bourgeoisie and the paid bourgeois strata, the latter much more conservative than the former. And the reason why I would agree with this conception of the petty bourgeois is more reactionary than the big bourgeoisie, at least as individuals, is because, as I explained, essentially a pay bourgeois is a dying class. The individual pay bourgeois person is constantly trying to essentially just survive another day, right? And they maybe spent years of their life building up enough capital to own the means of production, maybe hire one or two or three or four employees, And there's really no more exploitative business than a family business, right? Just the way that those treat family members is not great. Um, but anyway, and they look at the revolution, they're like, well, why don't you just be like me? The big bourgeoisie, on the other hand, they might have, moral, individual moral stuff, like they recognize the exploitation, and they're not so emotionally attached. Anyway, continuing. Gives way to a policy welding the proletariat with the middle classes. In this sense, the social phenomena of opportunism does not differ from that of fascism, as it is in both cases a matter of subjection to the pay bourgeoisie, of which the so-called intellectuals, the so-called political and bureaucratic administrative class form part, which naturally are not classes able of historical vitality, but only base, marginal, and bootlicker strata. It's an interesting way of putting that. Who are to be recognized not as the deserters of the bourgeoisie, of whom Marx describes a fatal passing to the ranks of the revolutionary class, but as the best servant and select knights of capitalist conservatism, living on salaries that come from the extortion of surplus value from workers. The new movement showed even signs of falling into the illusion that there would be something to do within bourgeois parliaments, though with the aim of giving new life to the plan contained in the famous theses of Lenin, thus not taking into consideration the fact that an irrevocable historical result had demonstrated that such tactics could not end, however noble and grandiose they would be in 1920, when history seemed poised, with the perspectives of a revolutionary attack aiming to blow parliaments from the inside, while instead all was reduced to vulgar revenge against fascism of Modigliani's cry, "Long live Parliament." To anybody who is kind of tuning out here, essentially what's being said here is social democracy and fascism go hand in hand. That essentially the petty bourgeois strata, the intellectuals and whatnot, calling for the restoration of democracy after World War II, before anything else, were doing the job of the bourgeoisie more than anything. And rather than taking on the correct stance of saying, no, we're doing our fucking revolution, instead they urged the workers to go in, vote, and restore bourgeois democracy. Class collaborationism, in other words. Um, and and the proletariat since has kind of been bought into this idea, and every year, and we see this currently, this is the most important election of your lives. It's all down to this vote. If you don't vote Democrat, if you don't vote Labor, if you don't vote whatever, then the fascists, the conservatives will win. It's like, okay, are you doing anything about them? And their answer is ultimately no. Their answer is we're ultimately making them worse, but that just means that you have to do democracy harder, right? Right, guys? But at a certain point, that's just gotta end. They're gonna lose at some point, for any list of reasons, and because they won't fight against it, it's up to us to fight, and it obviously can't be done through the limitations of democracy, because fascism is not limited by democracy, or its capital, for that matter. Anyway, continuing. 7. It was a matter of transition from one generation to another, of the generation which had lived through the glorious struggles of the first post-war period and the Livorno split, handing over to the new proletarian generation, which needed to be delivered from the mad elevation about the collapse of fascism in order to restore its awareness of the independent action of the Revolutionary Party, which is opposed to all other parties, and especially the Social Democratic Party, in order to reestablish forces committed to the prospect of the dictatorship and proletarian terror against the big bourgeoisie, along with all of its rapacious instruments. This being the case, the new movement, in an organic and spontaneous way, came up with a structural form for its activity, which has been tried and tested over the last 15 years. The party fulfilled aspirations which had been expressed within the communist left since the time of the Second International and afterward during the historic struggle against the first manifestations of opportunist danger within the Third. This long-standing aspiration is to struggle against democracy and prevent this vile bourgeois myth from gaining any influence. It has its roots in Marxist critique, the fundamental texts and early documents of proletarian organizations from the time of the Communist Manifesto onwards. If human history is not to be explained by the influence of exceptional individuals who have managed to excel through strength and physical valor, or by moral or intellectual force, a political struggle is seen, in such a way which is wrong and diametrically opposed to ours, as the selecting of such exceptional personalities, whether believed to be the work of divinities, or entrusted to social aristocracies, or, in the form most hostile to all of us, entrusted to the mechanism of vote counting, to which all elements in society are eventually admitted, when in fact history is a history of class struggles, which can only be read and applied to real battles, which are no longer critiques, but are violent and armed, by laying bare the economic relations that classes establish between themselves within given forms of production. If this fundamental theorem has been confirmed by the blood shed by countless fighters whose generous efforts have been violated by democratic mystification, and if the heritage of the communist left has been erected on this balance sheet of oppression, exploitation, and betrayal, then the only road worth following was one which over the course of history has freed us more and more from the lethal machinery of democracy, not only in society and the various bodies organized within it, but also within the revolutionary class itself, and above all in its political party. This aspiration of the left, which cannot be traced back to a miraculous intuition or rational enlightenment on the part of a great thinker, but which emerged under the impact of a chain of real, violent, bloody, and merciless struggles, because the real face of capital comes off, the mask of democracy, of humanism, just falls away when it protects its class interests. And it's like, yeah, all those things that you're voting for, that we said that we supported, those things come after the class war. And guess who's got the fucking guns? Prole, get back to work or die. So yeah. Even when it ended in the defeat of the revolutionary forces, has left its historic traces in a whole series of manifestations of the left. From when it was struggling against electoral coalitions and in the influence of Masonic ideologies, against the supporters firstly of the colonial wars and then the gigantic First European War, which triumphed over the proletarian aspiration to abandon their military uniforms and turn their arms against those who had forced them to take them up, mainly by agitating the lubricous phantom of a fight for liberty and democracy. From when finally in all the countries of Europe, when finally in all the country, and under the leadership of the Russian revolutionary proletariat, the left threw itself into battle to bring down the main immediate enemy and target which protected the heart of the capitalist bourgeoisie, the social democratic right wing, and even more ignoble center which, defaming us just as it defamed Bolshevism, Leninism, and the Russian Soviet dictatorship, did everything it could to place another trap door between the proletarian advance and the criminal idealizations of democracy. At the same time, the aspiration to rid even the word democracy of any influence is evidence in the countless texts of the left hurriedly indicated at the start of these theses. Basically, the call for the abandonment of the principle of democracy and picking up organic centralism. So, sure, we'll We'll add this, and I'm also going to fix this little bit right here because there is a complete repetition. All right. All right. So the engagement in electoralism, both with bourgeois parliaments and within the party, must be resisted. The bourgeoisie will cease paying lip service to democracy the moment the proletariat take action to carry out the real program, and any party which wishes to actually construct communism needs to carry out the real program. Therefore, we cannot at any point rely on democracy. Within the party, the term democracy is supplanted by a new form of decision making apparatus. And we will see if it actually talks about what that new form is. 8. The working structure of the new movement, convinced of the importance, difficulty, and historical duration of its task, which is bound to discourage dubious elements motivated by career considerations because it held no promise, indeed ruled out any historical victories in the near future, was based on frequent meetings of envoys sent from the organized party sections. Here, no debates or polemics between conflicting theses took place, or anything arising out of nostalgia for the malady of anti fascism, and nothing needed to be voted on or deliberated over. There is simply the organic continuation of the serious historical work of handing on the fertile lessons of the past to present and future generations, to the new vanguards emerging from the ranks of proletarian masses, beaten down, deceived, and disappointed over and over again, but eventually destined to rebel against a capitalist society now in a state of purulent decomposition. They will at least feel in their living flesh how the extreme and most poisonous enemy are the ranks of populist opportunism, of bureaucrats of big unions and parties, and of the ridiculous pleiad of alleged cerebral intellectuals and artists, quote unquote, committed or engaged in earning some loaves for their harmful activity. By entering through the trader parties, the rich classes serve as like bootlickers, and by serving as well the bourgeois and capitalist sold the middle classes posing as people. This work and this dynamic is inspired by the classical teachings of Marx and Lenin, who presented the great historical revolutionary truths in the form of theses. And these reports and theses of ours, faithfully grounded in the great Marxist tradition, now over a century old, were transmitted by all those present, thanks partly to our press communication. Okay, are you going to explain the process, or are you just going to say that was done? At the local and regional meetings where this historical material is brought into contact with the party as a whole. It would be nonsense to claim that they are perfect texts, irrevocable and unchangeable, because over the years the party has always said that it was material under continuous elaboration, destined to assume an ever better and more complete form. In fact, all ranks of the party, even the youngest elements, have always, and with increased frequency, made remarkable contributions that are perfect keeping with the left's classical line. It was only by developing our work along the lines indicated above that we expect to see a quantitative growth in our ranks and of the spontaneous adhesion to the party, which will one day make a greater social force. That did not happen. Doesn't actually say how. It just said that. Okay, well we'll take this, but it's not very useful. All right. Here, and we're also going to get and sure, let's get this as well. Dot dot. Okay. All right. Uh, I've learned the secret of their organic centralism. The working structure expects its work to be important, difficult, and take a significant period of time. Careerism expelled through such recognition, as victory is not on the table because nobody wants to bet on a horse that isn't moving, right? Frequent meetings without debate or polemics between competing theses publicized through press communication at these local and regional meetings occurred. No votes or deliberation occurred. Simple theoretical elaborations. They're describing an academic setting. They're describing something like this, right? Where people just talk about it and yeah, the theory is developed, sure, but you're not doing anything with it. Is therefore in academia that quantitative growth in ranks and spontaneous discipline and adhesions in the party occur. This is left communist theory. These are the people that are complaining about. Uh, I didn't even bother getting it. What was it? The cerebral intellectuals. Are these the vanguards of the revolution? People who don't do polemics, they just do academic work, elaborating theory. This will work, but not in anything that's a really real active organization, a really real active party. This is a very this sort of thing works when as they recognize, right? They recognize right here, this sort of thing works when you have abandoned the struggle and you're just sitting there trying to do stuff. It's not a victory. It's a retreat, and it should not be treated as a victory. It should be treated as what it is, a resounding failure. Um, a shameful one at that. Okay. Anyway, 9. Before moving on to from the topic of the party's formation after the Second World War, it is worth reaffirming a few outcomes which are today enshrined as characteristic party positions. Insofar as they are de facto historical results, despite the limited quantitative extension of the movement, and neither discoveries of useless geniuses nor solemn resolutions made by quote unquote sovereign congresses. The party soon realized that, even in an extremely unfavorable situation, even in places where the situation was absolutely sterile, restricting the movement's activity merely to propaganda and political proselytism is dangerous and must be avoided. At all times, in all places, and with no exceptions, the party must make an unceasing effort to insert its life into the life of the masses, participate in its protests as well, even when these are influenced by directives in conflict with our own. It is an old thesis of left wing Marxism that we must work in reactionary trade unions in which workers are present, and the party abhors the individualistic positions of those who disdain to set foot in them, and who go so far as to theorize the failure of the few feeble strike that today's unions dare to call. In many regions, the party already has a remarkable record of activity in the trade unions, although it always faces serious difficulties and opposing forces which are greater than ours from a statistical point of view. It is important to establish that, even where such work has not really got off the ground, we must reject the position in which a small party is reduced to being a set of closed circles with no connection with the outside world, or limits itself to just recruiting members in the world of opinion, which for the Marxists is a false group world if not treated as a superstructure of the world of economic conflicts. Similarly, it would be wrong to divide the party or its local groupings into watertight compartments that are only active in one field, whether theory, study, historical research, propaganda, proselytism, or trade union activity. This is because the very essence of our theory and our history is that these various fields are totally inseparable, and in principle accessible to each and every comrade. Another position which marks a historical conquest for the party, and huh? This stuff ain't your party. as you recognize, this was everybody. So why are you saying this is your party and your own historical conquest? Okay. Another position which marks a historical conquest for the party, and one which it will never relinquish, is a clear cut rejection of all proposals to increase its membership, the recalling of congresses to bring together the countless other circles and grouplets, which since the end of the war have popped up everywhere elaborating distorted and disjointed theories, or whose condemnation of Russian Stalinism and all of its local variations is the only positive thing they have to offer. Okay. We'll take this. The party should go wherever workers are. The party should not be divided up. All local groups should be active in all fields, and all comrades should have access to theory, study, historical research, propaganda, proselytism, and trade union activity, among other things, of course. Okay. 10. Returning to the early years of the Communist International, we will recall that its Russian leaders, who had behind them not only a thorough knowledge of Marxist doctrine and history, but also the outstanding outcome of the October Revolutionary victory, conceded theses such as Lenin's binding on all, although acknowledging that in the course of the International Party's life there was room for further elaboration. They never asked for them to be put to the vote because everything was accepted by unanimous agreement and spontaneously confirmed by everyone on the periphery of the organization, which in those glorious years was living in an atmosphere of enthusiasm and even triumph. The left didn't disagree with these generous ambitions, but held that, in order to achieve the outcomes all of us dreamt about, the Communist Party, sole and undivided, needed to have some of its organizational and constitutional measures tightened up and made more rigorous, and likewise its tactical norms clarified. As soon as a certain relaxation in these vile areas started to emerge, denounced by us to the great Lenin himself, it started to produce harmful effects, and we were forced to meet reports with counter reports, theses with counter theses. This would be Lenin's left communism and infantile disorder, I assume. Unlike other opposition groups, even those formed in Russia and the Trotskyist current itself, we always carefully avoided having our work within the International take the form for a cause for democratic electoral consultations of party membership as a whole, or for the election of steering committees. The left hoped to be able to save the International and its vital core rich of traditions without organizing secessionist movements, and always rejected the accusation of being organized, or being about to organize itself as a fraction, or as a party within the party. Nor did the left encourage or approve the practice of individual resignations from the party or from the International, even when the displays of the current rising opportunism were becoming more and more undeniable. Nevertheless, dozens of examples from previously cited texts evidence that the left, in its underlying thinking, had always rejected elections, the voting for named comrades, or for general theses, the mean of determining choices, and believed that the road to the suppression of these means leads likewise to the abolition of another nasty aspect of politicians' democratism, that is, expulsions, removals, and dissolutions of local groups. On many occasions, we have openly argued that such disciplinary procedures should be used less and less until they finally disappear altogether. Okay, we'll add this. Elections within the party for named comrades or general theses to be universally applied should not occur. Suppression resultant of such elections of the losing side results in expulsions, removals, and dissolution of local groups which disagree with the center. It should be avoided, and they seem to think that would be avoided by the rejection of the democratic method and just getting everybody to agree. But, what's actually going to happen is the people who disagree with the general movement of the party are just going to leave of their own accord. And while this kind of resolves one problem, it also kind of makes it so the party is a lot less capable of maneuvering because it's having to wait for everybody to come to their own conclusions. Okay. If the opposite should occur, or worse still, if these disciplinary questions are wheeled out not to safeguard sound revolutionary principles, but rather to protect the conscious or unconscious positions of nascent opportunism, as happened in 1924, 25, 26, this just means that the central function has been carried out in the wrong way, which determined its loss of any influence on the base from a disciplinary point of view. And the more that is the case, the more is phony discipline rigor shamelessly praised. In the very early years, the left hoped the organizational tactical concessions might be justified by the fecundity of the historical moment and have only temporary value. Basically, it would produce more, uh, it would get more people on board. Um, since Lenin's prospect was one of major revolutions in Central and maybe Western Europe, and after these lines would return to their clear and all-encompassing one, which was in keeping with the vile principles. But the more that such a hope came to be gradually replaced by a certainty that we are headed for opportunistic ruin, which inevitably assumed its classical form of glorification and exaltation of democratic and electoral intrigue, the more the left conducted its historical defense without undermining its mistrust of the democratic mechanism. Such a distrust is maintained even when we are forced by electoral combines within parties to accept the game, and while such tricks had to be welcomed when made by fascism, which just enabled workers to reply to provocations by taking up arms, they had to be repudiated when impudently perpetrated by the fathers of the new opportunism, on the point of reconquering both parties and international. Though, if in theory it could give ironic satisfaction hearing them say, "We are 10 and we want to submit to you, who are 1,000," as we were far too sure they would end their shameful career by cheating workers' votes by the million. Okay, this, this is a confusing sentence, but okay. 11. It has always been a firm and consistent position of the left that if disciplinary crises multiply and become the rule, it signifies that in the general running of the party is not right, and the problem merits study. Naturally, we won't repudiate ourselves by committing the infantile mistake of seeking salvation in a search for better people, or in the choice of leaders and semi-leaders, all of which we hold to be part and parcel of the opportunist phenomena, historical antagonists of the forward march of left revolutionary Marxism. Okay, no, yeah, this is fair. Okay, the left staunchly basically they're saying that hey, if there's a problem in the party, it's caused by the organizational structure of the party itself, not because you have poor leaders or something along those lines. This is generally true. And if you've got poor leaders that are causing the problem, that's because your method of having leadership is wrong too. So it's ultimately an organizational problem anyway. Okay. The left staunchly defends another Marx and Lenin's fundamental theses. That is, that a remedy for the alternations and historical crises which will inevitably affect the party cannot be found in constitutional or organizational formulae magically endowed with the property of protecting the party against degeneration. Such a false hope is one amongst the many petty bourgeois illusions dating back to Proudhon and which, by numerous connections, reemerge in Italian ordinativism, namely, that the social question can be resolved using a formula based on producers' organizations. Over the course of party evolution, the path followed by the formal parties will undoubtedly be marked by continuous U-turns and ups and downs, and also by ruinous precipices, and will class with the ascending path of the historical party. Left Marxists direct their efforts towards realigning the broken curve of the contingent parties with the continuous and harmonious curve of the historical party. This is basically, as we established before, the historical party is um, essentially, when the various efforts fail the party gets rediscovered historically and the theory within it gets elaborated. So, the actual historical party never actually fails. That's only the formal party which emerges out of the historical party. Therefore, the historical party is incapable of having any issues. Only the immediate formalization that emerges out of the historical party does. It's a nice way of essentially saying that our party form will never have any problems because it doesn't really ever exist at any point in time. It only exists out of time, out of history. Whereas your formalized thing, which fits your conditions in a particular moment, you know, will necessarily fall because it will eventually become conservative as conditions change, rather than accepting the possibility that you could design a party organization to be dynamic and changing. You know that's something that can happen, right? Uh, anyway, this is a position of principle, but it's childish to try and transform it into an organizational recipe. In accordance with the historical line, we utilize not only the knowledge of mankind's, the capitalist class, and the proletarian classes past and present, but also a direct and certain knowledge of society's and mankind's future, as mapped out by our doctrine, and the certainty that will culminate in the classless and stateless society, which could, in a certain sense, be considered a partyless society, unless one understands by party an organ which fights not against other parties, but which conducts the defense of mankind against the dangers of physical nature, its evolutionary and eventually catastrophic processes. What? Are they saying that the party will protect humanity from itself? Okay, bro. Sure thing. The communist left has always considered that its long battles against the sad contingencies of the proletariat succession of formal parties has been conducted by affirming positions that continuous and harmonious way are connected on the luminous trail of the historical party, which continues unbroken after years and centuries, leading from the first declarations of the nascent proletarian doctrine to the society of the future, which we know very well insofar as we have thoroughly identified the tissue and ganglia of the present avaricious society which a pro-revolution must sweep away. Uh, so, oh yes, the because of the theory of reversal praxis or whatever, essentially the party is able to anticipate the future as well, and therefore organize itself to match the future society and prefigure it. So this is another way that the historical party essentially is somehow both matching the future, but also matching the past by the current and the past at the same time by never actually being in existence really. And anytime that it is in existence, it's formalized, and that automatically makes it bad. Well, it doesn't say it's bad, but at the same time, it's very clearly saying it's bad. Okay, let's see. Was there anything here that I wanted to get? We'll get there. But we'll get this entire section as well. And sure, let's grab this here. Engel's proposal to adopt the good old German word Gemeinwesen, common being, i.e., social community, in place of the word state, was connected to Marx's judgment on the commune, which was no longer a state just because it was no longer a democratic body. No. That's not what Marx said at all. It was a working body. It was no longer a political body, but it was a democratic body. Elections occurred, and that was a key part of it. This is historically incorrect. A working versus political body are different things to the process of democracy. This is an incorrect reading. Either they have mistranslated or something else. I don't know. But that is not what Marx had to say. Continuing. After Lenin, such a theoretical question does not require any further explanations, and there is no contradiction in his brilliant remark that, apparently, Marx is much more of a champion of the state than Engels. As the former bear explained, the revolutionary dictatorship being a true state, provided with armed forces and a repressive police, and with a political and terroristic law, which does not tie its own hands with legal traps. The question is also referred to the two masters' unanimous condemnation of the German socialists' revisionist idealization and the foolish formula of free people's state, which not only sends out a stench of bourgeois democratism, but above all reverses the whole notion of inexorable conflict between classes, which involves the destruction of the bourgeoisie's historical state and the erection on its ruins of the more unmerciful, ever aversive, evasive. No. Self-revelation, especially responding. Indifferent to eternal constitutions. Okay. I don't know what that's saying. But we're going to grab this section here. All right. Okay, so the historical party, through reversal praxis, is able to look to the future, and because it doesn't really get put in place and exist, it never makes any mistakes or formalizations. It just emerges as a correct formulation through the class struggle. This formulation is the formal party, which eventually becomes conservative as the conditions that create it change. This historical party prefigures communist society in the future, taking on the form of that communist society, but is also situated in the present and doesn't allow counter-revolution within the party. Again, this thing it doesn't really exist. It's just a thing that they say will emerge when conditions change, right? And the need for the party comes back. So people read theory, and then they'll just remake the party, the real historical party, as opposed to the formal one from previous circumstances. And then it'll actually be the correct thing. Anyway, it was not therefore a matter of finding a model of the future state in constitutional or organizational features, which is just as stupid as an attempt to erect, in the first country won to dictatorship, a model for other countries, states, and societies. But equally futile, maybe more so, is the idea of constructing a model of the perfect party, an idea redolent of the decadent weaknesses of the bourgeoisie, which, unable to defend its power to maintain its crumbling economic system or even to exert controls over its doctrinal thinking, takes refuge in distorted robotic technologisms in order, through these stupid formal automatic models, to not a single word of this spew of insults actually responded to any of it. Not a single word. Where has the conception of the automatic model been proved wrong? Where has it been shown to be incorrect? Is insulting it all that's necessary to disprove something? Or do you need to ground it? Is it worthless? Okay, whatever. Moving on. 12. Among the doctrinal processes that and the reason why I keep saying this is because essentially what I'm saying is I want to determine what are the what's the initial construction, organizational principles, organizational structure, principles, and tactics of a communist party that's capable of, taking creating the dictatorship of the proletariat. My argument is essentially that through a model of high, which is shared amongst all organizational formats, by the way, and I'm talking about cybernetics theory, you should be able to create a dynamic structure that is capable of uh, of doing all this stuff that they're saying, but being applied in many different places in many different ways. All organizations need certain things. This is incontestable. All organizations need to deal with the external. All organizations need to deal with the internal. All organizations need an internal auditing process. All organizations have individuals. All organizations have different institutions and structures and so on and so forth. Since all those have shared characteristics, we can say something universal about organizations. Then we look at and say, okay, this is a political class party, not a union, not an economic organization, not a council, not a group. It is a party. What differentiates a party from a Soviet council? What differentiates a party from some other sort of organization? Once you say that, then we can say there is something universal that makes a party and not something else. What is that thing? Maybe we can study that. So, this conception that there's no formal model is dead on arrival. Because if the party is a party and not something that is not a party, then that means that it is a party and therefore has some form of formal form. What a ridiculous phrase I just said here, but seriously, none of this responds to anything like that. And it's just like, guys, just fucking say. This said that it would engage the organizational structure, the structure of the World Communist Party. At what point has it said anything about structure? At what point has it given any indication about the actual structure of the organization? It has not. It has avoided the topic entirely. And then it goes in and says, hey, listen, asking for information on what the party might look like is actually, futile, redolent, decadent weakness of the bourgeoisie, exert control over its doctrinal thinking, and stupid, escape scientific certainty, which no, that's the exact opposite. But it's like, where's your answer to my questions? And the answers, they don't have an answer to it. I have been reading and reading and reading their stuff, and not one of it actually addresses this question. They present this historic party, but it's like, this thing doesn't exist. It cannot exist. It's a fantasy. It's an idealized thing that people are looking to, and they're modeling their formal parties off of in a given moment. And then it disappears into the ether again. Right? But when they're formalizing it, they're most certainly writing down the organizational structures there. Okay. Never mind. Anyway, let's just get through this. 12. Among the doctrinal processes that we can for a moment name philosophical, included in the tasks of the communist left and of its international movement, is the development of the above mentioned theses, that we supplied with quite a few contributions by carrying out a research that demonstrates its consistency to the classical positions of Marx, Engels, and Lenin. The first truth that man will be able to gain is the notion of future communist society. Such a structure does not require any material coming from the present infamous society, with its capitalist, democratic, and paltry Christian features, and it does not regard the alleged positive science created by the bourgeois revolution as a human heritage on which we found it. But positive, as in positivism. I hope that this isn't an attack on just science generally, but on positivism. Um, Anyway, as human heritage on which we found, as for us, is a class science to be destroyed and replaced piece by piece, just as well as religions and scholastics belonging to previous forms of production. In the field of the theory of economic transformations that from capitalism, the structure of which we know well, and official economists completely ignore, lead to communism. We do as well without the contributions of bourgeois science. The same contempt we have for its technology, which is highly praised, above all by imbecile opportunist traders. It's on the path to great conquests. In a totally revolutionary way, we set up the science of society's life and future outlet. In such a work, the human mind will be perfect, which won't be possible before the killing of capitalism, its civilization, of its schools, of its science, and of its technology worth of thieves. Okay, to clarify here, what they're saying is science under bourgeois society is done in the interest of the bourgeoisie. What technology is created with the intent of maximizing extraction of surplus value. Not everything is like this. You know, there's like the creation of insulin, and the guy's like, it should be $1, but then the bourgeoisie take the patent, and that was sold for $1 because he said it should be available to everybody, and then they turn into $200 for a month's worth or whatever, right? This is the kind of shit that goes down. Uh, and school and education. What is education in our current society? It's the production of future workers and so on and so forth. Future proletarians that are in the thrall of capital, rather than a revolutionary pedagogy. This absolutely requires a complete deconstruction of the school system and a reconstruction of revolutionary education. Um, uh, what was there? Yeah, and the human mind, the individual in and through society and a scientific society at that, etc., etc. Okay, man will for the first time be able to write both a science and history of physical nature and to know the great problems of the universe's life. To start with what is still called creation by scientists, one back to the dogma, to all its infinite and infinitesimal implications in this so far undeciphered future. And then finally, 13. The above and other problems are a field of action of the party we keep alive, not unworthy to get into the same line of the great historical party. But such concepts of high theory are not resources able to solve petty disputes and small human doubts, which will unfortunately last as long as the presence of individuals, surrounded and dominated by the barbarian environment of capitalist civilization, among our ranks will last. Then such developments cannot be used to explain how the opportunist free party's way of living takes place. So you're saying that you can't explain any of it. Okay. This comes back to me bitching about Panakoek and when I was researching worker councils. What was it that he said? Uh, there we go. So from Panakoek, quote, workers' councils do not designate a form of organizations whose lines are fixed once and for all, and which only requires a subsequent elaboration on the details. It means the principle of worker self-management or of enterprises and of production. And then Matic, the council idea applies no more, but also no less than the self-organization of the workers whenever and wherever this becomes an inescapable necessity for a struggle of their immediate needs or for farther reaching goals, which can either no longer be reached by or in fact opposed by traditional labor organizations such as trade unions and political parties. In short, they'll figure out if they just do what comes natural. You know, this is profoundly unhelpful. This is spontaneity. I'm just gonna say that straight out. This is spontaneity. It's profoundly unhelpful. It's useless to anybody that you're talking to. Like, imagine you're trying to convince somebody of the necessity of the party, and they say, "Okay, can you explain how the party is structured?" And then you go on this long-winded speech about how essentially, hey, the party will just emerge organically. And then you say, but can you explain how the party is structured? And then you say, it will just organically arise. What's that person going to say? They're going to say, you are full of shit. And they will leave. Because if you cannot even explain on the face of it the basic format that you have in mind, then you have nothing to say about any of it. Like, I don't even know what to say here. Okay. Let me just reread. Maybe I misread something, but I doubt it. The above and other problems are the field of action of the party we keep alive, not unworthy to get into the same line of the great historical party. But such concepts of high theory are not resources able to solve petty disputes and small human doubts, which will unfortunately last as long as the presence of individuals surrounded and dominated by the barbarian environment of capitalist civilization among our ranks will last. Okay, so they're saying that, because bourgeois society is around individuals, can't come to the same conclusions that the minds of the party as a whole, through their theoretical elaborations, have come to through organic centralism. Then such developments cannot be used to explain how the opportunist free party's way of living takes place, as it lies in organic centralism and cannot arise from a quote unquote revelation. There's a really good there's a really good saying by, I can't remember that scientist's name, but it was quantum physicist of some sort, and he said that the mark of an intelligent person is to be able to explain complicated topics to somebody in a simple way. That's something that I strive to imitate, right? I'm not asking for full accounting of the organizational structure. I really don't need a complete listing of all the different levels, all the different sections and groups and so on and so forth. I'm looking at something like Lenin's conception of the central organ and its duties versus the central committee and its duties, and some indication of the various structures within that. It's not that complicated. Lenin's able to explain it within 20 pages, right? There's nothing particularly complicated about that. And yet, apparently, you just have to take it on faith that their structure can come to this organizational conception if, people just do what comes naturally, and that in fact they have the correct way because their people are doing what comes naturally. This is profoundly unhelpful, and I implore anybody who's ever trying to convince anybody of anything, to abandon this sort of stuff. Concretize, formalize, explain, teach. These are the things that are necessary to get people on board with anything. People will not bet on a wrong horse. They will not bet on a horse that they cannot see. They will not bet on a horse that, it could just be a couple of guys under a sheet that are going in and running a scam, right? Such an evident Marxist thesis can be found as a heritage of the left in all polemics against Moscow Center's degeneration. The party is at the same time a factor and a result of the situation's historical course. It can never be seen as an extraneous and abstract element, and able to dominate the surrounding environment without falling again into a new and faint utopianism. The fact that within the party there may be an inclination to give life to a fiercely anti-bourgeois background, widely anticipating the character of communist society, is an old enunciation, made also, for instance, by the young Italian communists in 1912. But such a worthy aspiration cannot lead us to consider the ideal party as a phalanstery surrounded by insurmountable walls. A group of people living together in a community free of external regulation, holding property in common. The screening of parties in the organic central scheme is carried out in a way we have always supported against the Moscow centrists. The party continues to hone and refine the distinctive features of its doctrine, of its actions and tactics, with a unique methodology that transcends spatial and temporal boundaries. Clearly, all those who are uncomfortable with these delineations can just leave. Okay, sure. Not even after the seizure of power has taken place can we conceive of having forced relay membership in our ranks, which is why organic centralism excludes terroristic pressures in the disciplinary field, which we can't help but adopt even the very language of absurd bourgeois constitutional forms, such as the power of the executive power to dissolve and reassemble elective formations, all forms that for a long time we have considered obsolete, not only for the proletarian party, but even for the revolutionary and temporary state of the victorious proletariat. The party does not have to display to those who want to join it any constitutional or legal plans for the future society, as such forms are only proper to class society. Those who, seeing the party continuing on its clear way that we have attempted to summarize in the theses of the Naples General Meeting, July 1965, do not yet feel at such a historical level, know very well that they can take any other direction turning away from ours. We do not have to take any other steps on the matter. Genius, guys. Absolutely genius. You have indeed figured out the perfect way of getting the correct line. You have indeed avoided your phalanstery by your genius structure of essentially telling people to just figure it out and leave if you don't like it. Okay. With that said, it's 7:01. I'm not going to summarize this right now, but thank you everybody for coming, and thank you for joining whoever has been listening on the YouTube thing, and have a wonderful day.